Okay, Lori, it's all yours.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to my talk on planting for pollinators. I am Lori Weidenhammer, also known as Madame Beespeaker, and I am a settler of German, English, Scottish, and Irish descent. I'm originally from Saskatchewan, and I'm coming at you from Vancouver, which is the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the Coast Salish, who have lived here for thousands of years, were the first bee gardeners. They, meadows and hillsides of camas were burned to promote the growth of the edible bulbs, which is a wonderful plant for native bees. And if you've ever been on the island, on Vancouver Island, and seeing the camas fields, it's very, very beautiful. And apparently the island used to have so many of them that people would look out over them and it actually looked like a body of water with so many blossoms. So I usually talk for a long time, like an hour. I'm going to try to get a lot of things into one presentation, and I might have to end a little bit earlier than I'm used to, but I've also provided a couple of handouts for you in case I can't get through all my slides. This first slide is actually a bumblebee I saw yesterday, a queen bumblebee, and she's in the red flowering currant, which is a native shrub that is fantastic for bees and hummingbirds. It's very fragrant. There's one bush that's away from people, so I could take off my mask and just inhale the blossoms. It's just so beautiful. And what's interesting about this bumblebee queen is that she's already collecting pollen, which means she started to lay eggs and she's got a nest and she is going to feed those babies some pollen. So that's a really good sign that she's got her life cycle and her nest is already started. Come on. There we go. So this is where I'm from in Saskatchewan, Cactus Lake, Saskatchewan. Oh. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here. My forward and backward buttons aren't working. Anyway, I'm originally from Saskatchewan, from the prairies, and I grew up with wheat fields in my backyard, my mom's garden, and beautiful wildflower in pastures. And so I'm really concerned about all these systems and how we manage them for pollinators. And my dad was kind of a World War II buff. He wasn't old enough to go to World War II, but he got really interested in the history, and he taught me about victory gardens. And so I've actually written a book called Victory Gardens for Bees, and it's about growing food for you, yourself, but also sharing food for the bees. So it's taking the idea of the victory garden, digging up your lawn, growing a garden for yourself, for your neighbors, for your family, and also growing and sharing food for pollinators. And this is my mom and her sister in the 1940s. And of course, during World War II, people grew a lot of potatoes. So they're a victory garden staple. So what is a victory garden for bees? It's a place where you can grow food and medicines for humans and bees within a community context. Gardening can bring us together as a community. It's a place for restoration, for rewilding our human altered landscapes to add indigenous food and medicines for bees and humans. And I advocate for a positive synergy between settler and First Nations indigenous-based plant wisdom. Bees, there's so many. They're so diverse, from the giant big carpenter bees, the big bumblebee queens that you're seeing at the top of the page, down to the mason bees and the honeybees, which are kind of a medium-sized bee, and the really teeny tiny bees, which are so hard to see. They're called shadow bees or fairy bees. So there's 20,000 species of bees worldwide. Only 9 of those species make honey. Over 900 in Canada, nearly 500 bee species in BC. We are the most bee diverse province, so we're very, very lucky. So Honeybees are not native to British Columbia or North America, and people talk about saving the honeybees, but actually it's the native pollinators that we need to focus our energy on. And in fact, the inconvenient truth is that honeybees compete with native bees. So you're not actually helping the environment by putting honeybees in your backyard, because one hive actually takes resources away from thousands of native bees. For instance, a hive will typically need 120,000 kilograms of nectar, 20 kilograms of pollen in one year, and that's a lot of resources taken away from native bees. So these native bees nest in different places. They don't nest in a box hive like you see honeybees. A lot of them nest in plant stems and bare soil. They dig holes in the soil. They nest in trees or old stumps. And bumblebees actually live in old mouse nests. So here's an example. Sometimes it looks like you took a pencil and stuck it in the ground, and that's actually a bee nest in there. Schoolyards and churchyards where the soil is very compacted, it's really common to actually see these tiny little bee holes. And people don't even realize these bees coming up and getting the pollen from the dandelions and going back down. They don't even notice that they're there because they're not stinging bees. They're not aggressive bees. And here is a tiny little bee, smaller than a honeybee. And she is actually called a mining bee because she goes and mines her nest in the ground. And she's all covered, her back legs are all covered with dandelion pollen. She's gone down there. She's going to make a little pollen ball, lay an egg, and then make a little wall and make different cell chambers to make her nest. Sometimes when you're digging in your garden, you dig up a bee. That's because the queen bumblebees actually dig a little hole and they hibernate over the winter. So you can see the little bee tucked up in her little hole there. But this is the time of the year when they start emerging. They usually find an old mouse nest, like I told you, or you can actually make almost like a bird's nest for bumblebees. These are in Queen Elizabeth Park in Vancouver. And here is a little guard bee, the bumblebee, that's cautiously coming out and seeing if she needs to take some action to see the people that are looking at her bumblebee nest. She's not an aggressive bumblebee by any means. This is a stumpery, a place in your garden if you have rotting stumps that you can leave. And actually, bees will nest in the old beetle holes in these stumps. It might not look like a bee garden, but this is actually part of a really functional bee garden. And also a lot of bees nest in stems. This is a fennel plant that has been cut down about a foot or a foot and a half from the ground. And once in a while when you're gardening, you'll actually see a little bee stick her head up from in the middle of the stem because she's laying her eggs in there. Now, bumblebees are particularly vulnerable bees because they can't store their food like honeybees. And so if a bumblebee needs to have food every 40 minutes, so you need to have flowers all over the city so that the bumblebees that are traveling around and going in the flowers can top up their energy supply so that they can make it back to their nest to feed their babies. Imagine meadows on every front yard and boulevard. This is what our cities could look like. Pollinator gardens everywhere, connected to each other so that bees can date, mate, and procreate all along those paths. This is what my neighborhood looks like. A lot of our boulevards have been planted with these beautiful flowers. It looks gorgeous and it's good for the bees. Here's an idea, creative idea, planting a canoe with some beautiful plants. And another project on our street is a Project Green Block, where a lot of the neighbors put these raised beds in their gardens full of these bee plants. Really easy to do, and everybody pulled together and helped to build the beds. There's even one with seating that's right on the boulevard, so anyone could stop and smell the flowers and watch the bees. So this is called a pollinator pathway, and like I said, it's important that we connect hot spots, really beautiful gardens, with one another so that the habitat doesn't become too fragmented. So everybody can play a part. This is a little pollinator garden made by someone in the neighborhood who's in grade 6. And every little bit helps. There's some nice signage here, which she tells what she's doing. It's a great project. So gardens come and go, but you know what we really need for bees are trees. And a lot of the honeybees right now are in the cherry and the plum trees, and you can just hear them buzzing up there. Trees provide a volume of pollen and nectar, and they're there for years and years to come. So this is an example of a tree in our neighborhood. It's a beautiful crabapple tree, and that provides a lot of nectar and pollen for bees. So there are 5 native trees that I'd love you to consider growing: vine maple, crabapple, mountain ash, pin cherry, and ocean spray, all fantastic trees. And I've got a handout for you with those trees on it. There's also native shrubs, which are fantastic. The currant that I mentioned, ossoberry, which is blooming right now, rose, snowberry, Oregon grape, which is just about to bloom, and salmonberry. So this is that beautiful red flowering currant I showed you. And of course, when the red flowering currants are blooming, that's when the rufous hummingbirds come back from down south where they've spent the winter. So this is a little rufous hummingbird. This is the beautiful Oregon grape that's about to bloom, and the mason bees, the blue orchard mason bees that people have the little bee condos for. They love this plant. Nootka rose is one of the best things that you can plant for pollinators. Not a nectar plant, but a pollen plant. And the bees just swim around in there and they collect that pollen. And some bees actually cut holes in the rose leaves and they take that back to their nest and they line their nest with these leaves. It's pretty cool. There's also small carpenter bees that are so tiny, they live in the stems of some of the plants. This is a salal plant, and the little carpenter bee is actually making a nest in the stem of that plant. This is that beautiful salmonberry that's blooming right now. Each blossom has 60 stamens and there's lots of pollen in there, and the bumblebees just own that blossom. They dig in there, stick their tongue in, they suck up that nectar and they collect the pollen and take it back to their nest. So evergreen huckleberry is one of the plants that were managed by First Nations. And what they did was they actually pruned them and burned them so that they would produce more flowers, which was better for the bees, and it made more berries, which was great for the bears and the humans. This is an example of really good habitat management. Another food plant for bees that's really important because it blooms for such a long time is the snowberry. You might have seen it with the little white berries. The white berries are not food plants for humans, but they are food plants for birds. And of course, dandelions. We've covered so much of our habitat with lawns that there's usually nothing really good in there for bees except for weeds, such as clover and our beautiful dandelions. When people are gardening, I caution them about having their garden too neat. Bees actually like a messy, kind of lazy, not lazy, but lacy aesthetic. Lots of different things going to seed at different times. So a garden that's too neat and tidy is not as friendly for bees and butterflies. So there you have this beautiful garden, which is one of my favorite in the neighborhood. And when her plants are going to seed, her alliums, all she's doing is just putting this simple string around it just to keep it from flopping over into the sidewalk. But this is the kind of natural aesthetic that we're going for. And this is a really cool thing. There's an insect hotel here made out of an old telephone booth. Some of the younger kids won't even know what that thing is or was, but that was an old telephone booth. It's a great idea to make it into an insect hotel and then have this garden, pollinator garden in front of it. Another great idea is to take those cloth planting bags that you can find and just simply use them as pots. And you can plant, there's a squash in there and some herbs, something really simple that you can just put right on your lawn. This one has strawberries in it and that one has nasturtiums in it. Both are great plants for pollinators. Another easy thing to do, put a bunch of violets in half a barrel. Violets are also really great larval food for a lot of our butterflies. And I really like the camas that I talked about that that grows on the island. It's a lovely plant for bees, and you can actually grow it in your garden very easily as any other bulb. And these little anthophora bees, they're fast little suckers. They go all around and they have these really long tongues. They love these camas bulbs. So just remember to mark or remember where you planted the camas, because they die down after they're blooming. So you have to keep that spot safe for when it comes up the next year. So inside, if you have raised beds, I like a combination of annuals and smaller perennials. You can always move them out, move them around. Calendula is one of my favorite things to plant. Children can plant it. It's easy to grow from seed, and it makes a lovely little snuggly bed for a little sleepy bee. And borage is another great one that's easy to grow from seed. And it pumps out nectar every 5 minutes. So bees it really brings bees into your garden. And it's also a larval food for some of the painted lady butterflies. So there's a painted lady butterfly, and they lay their eggs on the leaves of the borage plants. And cosmos. Cosmos are another beautiful plant that you can put inside your raised bed or you can put outside. They're so easy to grow. The bees love them. The butterflies love them. And you might have got one of these beautiful pollinator packages, the Dr. Bonnie Henry pollinator blend, and those are actually cosmos flowers. That's what the flowers are going to look like. So you can actually grow them in intervals, plant some now, then in 2 weeks, and then in another 2 weeks, and then they'll bloom all summer, which will be really nice. And zinnias. Zinnias are another really beautiful, easy to grow plant that I recommend. This is what the painted lady butterfly looks like. And here we've got Phacelia, which has purple pollen, great for bees. In Germany, they call it Bienenfreunde, the friend of the bees. Scarlet runner beans are great for bees, but also hummingbirds. And of course, hummingbirds love honeysuckle. Garlic chives and just regular chives are fantastic for bees and butterflies in your garden. And they also help to deter some of those wee beasties that eat your plants. So I think, can you give me a time warning where I'm at in terms of my time? Because I don't want to go over and keep you too long.
Yeah, sorry, in the chat, I did the 5-minute one.
And in the chat?
Yeah, so now you're down to 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, I will go really fast. So we're going for perennials. Yarrow is fantastic. This is actually not a bee, but a wannabe, pretending to be a bee so that it doesn't get eaten by birds. Monarda, which is called bee balm, is in the mint family. Delicious nectar for bees. And it also is a hummingbird and butterfly magnet. This is the native one that we have. It's the mauve bee balm called Monarda fistulosa. Annie's hyssop is another mint family plant that's awesome for bees, and it's edible. The flowers you can make into a tea. Persian catmint is great because it blooms for many, many, many weeks. And lavender. Lavender, again, it brings bees right into your garden. And the butterflies love it too. Lupins are great. They're so beautiful and the bees love them. Penstemons, you might not have heard of these, but there are actually a lot of native penstemons that are fantastic for bees. Asters are really important in the fall. So things like echinacea, and echinacea is also great because the seeds feed the birds. And another one you might not have heard about is gumweed. And what's interesting about gumweed is that the bees actually collect the gum in the plant to glue their nest materials together. Sunflowers, we've got to have them in our garden. They're like a buffet for bees. Just be careful you don't plant the ones that are too fuzzy because they don't have the pollen and the nectar that the bees need. And native grasses are important for some butterflies. And nettles are also important for some larval species of butterflies. There we go. There's our beautiful bee with their pollen pants for collecting pollen. And some of the allies, if you're interested, you could join the Native Bee Society of British Columbia, the David Suzuki Butterfly Rangers, and look for Butterflies in My Backyard project on iNaturalist. And please support our native plant nurseries. It's really important to have fun when you're doing your pollinator gardening. And here's my book. You can check it out in the library and read all about it.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Do we have time for any questions?
Yep. Yeah, you do.
All right. So if anyone wants to ask me any questions in the chat, and whoever wants to let me know what the questions are, that would be awesome.
Everyone's just saying thank you very much.
Okay, good. Well, I encourage you all to get outside safely. And when the sun's out, you're really going to start seeing those bees. And they are so beautiful. It's just that time of the year when we start to see them. And I think it's really good for our mental and physical health to see the beauty of those bees in the flowers. And the message I just always leave with people is if you can, just plant a flower, any flower that you can, so that you can help our pollinators.
Thank you so much. Very amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's great.
Thank you very much. Well, this concludes this room for the afternoon. So I just wanted to thank everyone that has attended the events today for the Seniors Activity Fair. Really appreciate your participation, and hopefully we will maybe be seeing each other in person next year for Seniors Activity Fair. But as Lori has said, please keep safe, get outside, and yeah, we'll enjoy the long weekend.